Use your mind, you better think, you better think. Think it through, you better think, you better think, you better think. Are you a zombie? You better think. Use your mind, don't be a follower. You better think. Yeah, I like that.
Welcome to You Better Think, hosted by Cass Allen and the Poetess Chanelle. As always, we'll be bringing you some interesting content from several guests. This month we have a very interesting topic: explicit language, explicit content in all matters, abuse. And we're talking about abuse on all kinds of levels. So go get your cocktails and your snacks and get back to your seats in a few seconds because we need all the time that we can get to hit this topic.
Use your mind, you better think. Use your mind, you better think.
Abuse, as many of you know, it's an action word. It's also a noun. We talk about using, and some people use the two words synonymously, but they are not the same. And to abuse is actually to use, but to a bad effect or for a bad purpose or misuse, or treating people with cruelty or violence and things that are consistent or regular or repeated, even though you can have a one-time abuse episode. Then we have the noun. I've been hit with abuse. I've been hit with cruelty or treatment that's been considered or deemed bad or harmful or excessively improper, if you will. As I said, this subject is huge, and of course, we cannot cover everything in one episode, but we're going to touch on some things. We're going to touch on abuse as it relates to being an abuser and being an abusee, if you will. And we're going to talk to the perspective of the male and female from both spectrums. So without further ado, I'm going to get you into something here. So for those of you who listen on the regular, you already know I'm fed a topic every month, and I take it on. This month, the poetess Chanelle has fed us abuse. She'll explain to you why she did, but the point here for me as the opener is we have all abused someone at some point in our lives. Let's say most of us have. I try not to say all. I had a conversation with a friend on this very topic and asked her, has she ever abused anyone? And she vehemently said, absolutely not. And then I began to describe the different types of abuse that take place, in particular psychological abuse. A lot of people think if they never hit anyone, that they've never abused anyone. And that could be so far from the truth. And I began to feed her back some of her own episodes, actually, things that I have learned about her over the years, where she just sat there with deer eyes and headlights and said, oh my God, I have abused people. And I said, most of us have, whether or not it's intentional or not. We've misused someone or taken advantage of someone's feelings or played on them or instantly, dropped someone without regard, or we call people names, or we put people down, or we cheat. They're all levels of abuse. Like I said, whether they're one-hit wonders or they go on for an excessive amount of time. I think, as I tell you all the time, we're all cubs and we all make mistakes and we all grow and we all fumble. And that's a part of it. Our egos want things and sometimes we cross lines to feed them. I think the important part is that we, as I always say, try to grow. Because in my opinion, y'all already know. I think we're all idiots. We're all out here just trying to understand the meaning of life. I'm really not going to go heavily into this subject this month. because I have a panel that's going to go deep as you all want to go. So instead of doing my usual routine to start off the show, I'm going to keep it light, and we're going to start out with the poetess Chanelle.
Use your mind, you better think.
Hello, poetess Chanelle. How are you today?
I am great.
Great
And yourself?
voice. I'm doing great. I'm really excited about the show that you put together for this evening.
Yes, I'm excited as well. This topic really touches me, and it's important to me.
I was telling
Yeah,
the audience that it's going to be a very hot topic this evening, and I told them to run and get those beverages now because they might not want to get up.
exactly. They not gonna want to get up, girl.
I can't blame them. It is a hot topic, as I was telling them, abuse comes in so many forms and so many levels that we don't even realize most of us have abused someone, even if it's unintentional, whether it's through a
Yes,
little lie or a little deceit or calling them a name, just little things we don't realize are abuse. And people are so used to it being sexual or physical or going on and on and on. I was telling them sometimes one shot is abuse.
yes. And you don't realize it. Like, it was brought to my attention that I was an abuser. And I didn't even realize I was an abuser myself. I've been abused, and I also abuse people.
Amen. Same here. Like I said, through any little thing we do and don't realize it, especially that gaslighting most of us are so good at.
Right, right. And even calling somebody dummy and stupid, that is like abuse too. That is abuse. That's verbal abuse.
Was that your pet name for someone in the past?
Yes. I used to say, like, I used to be like, just very combative and like very angry. And I realized that I have abused people with my mouth, and my hands too. Like, and then I realized I was abused also. So it was like it was just a cycle, and, as you grow, you evolve, you change your ways, and you realize, man, I was doing damage also,
That
you
is so
know?
true. Things that we don't even realize. And that's so brave of you to admit that you've also been the abuser and abused. So many
Yeah.
people just portray one side, or like we said earlier, don't even realize they're abusing someone.
Right, because my issue was that I'm saying, okay, I just called this person a dummy, but this person was gaslighting me, psychologically abusing me, mentally abusing me, devaluing my value as a woman. So their abuse was greater than mine, calling them stupid. Get what I'm saying?
Yeah, you bring up a great point. Often when we think of abuse, we see one as the abuser, and sometimes both people in a relationship are abusing each other. And I think that's where we lead to calling relationships toxic a lot of times.
Yes, very toxic, very, very sabotaging, very damaging, and then when you move on, and if it's not addressed, and then you move on to another relationship, the same cycle happens over and over again.
That's an excellent point. I was watching something a couple of days ago where someone was saying that something in our like genetics, once you abuse often, just like being addicted to a drug, certain hormones in your body get used to that abuse, and when it's not there, they look forward to it. That's a little
Right.
scary, but I get it.
It's like you're addicted to being with somebody toxic.
Mm.
That's what it is. It's
Some
like,
people think that's love too, which is sad.
yes, Some people think it's like, oh, he slapped me upside the head. Oh, she slapped me upside the head. Oh, they in love with me. Or
Right.
somebody's stalking you. Or somebody's stalking you. Like, some people think that's love. No, that is abuse. That is obsession. That is dangerous.
That is so true.
Use your mind, you better think. You better think. Think it through, you better think.
So true.
You know, I was in a relationship like that I was being stalked. And I've been in 2 relationships like that, and it's not a joke. Imagine you come outside minding your own business, going from a hard day's of work, and someone just jumps out from behind a tree.
Mm.
It's like, oh, I knew you was cheating. Really?
That's scary.
Yes. I was like, I couldn't believe it. I could not believe it. I could not believe it. The shock that came over me, because I was talking to my friends, my brother's, one of his closest friends. He was playing ball, and I had saw him on my way to the train station, and I was talking to him. I said, "What's up, Breeze? Whatever, whatever." And next thing you know, I see a figure from behind this big tree that was by the park. Oh, I knew you was cheating. I knew it. I knew you was a hoe, this and this. What?
Mm.
What? It was on after that. It was like,
imagine.
it was awful. Arguing down the street, it was a mess. It was a mess. And I'm glad that I got out of that relationship. That's all I have to say.
You hear that, ladies and gentlemen? As we said, a lot of us have been in abusive relationships, and the beauty of it all is that we can make U-turns, even though sometimes it seems hopeless, it seems daunting, like it can't be done. You just heard the poetess Chanelle say, I'm glad I got out of that relationship. And on that note, we'll be right back.
Use your mind, you better think. You better think. Think it through, you better think. You better think. You better think.
Welcome back, ladies, gentlemen, and others. As you all know, and those of you who do not know, the poetess Chanelle has mad skills when it comes to dropping the word. And every month we get graced with something by her. As I said earlier in the show, she picks the topics. This month is abuse, and she's about to drop it. So I'm going to sip some tea.
This poem is titled Abuse. Abuse is never okay, no matter what form it comes in. Scars everlasting can be so debilitating, especially when it comes from someone who you care for. Narcissism at the roots, that's what it all boils down to. Psychological abuse, in my opinion, is one of the most inimical forms, causing distorted feelings about one's self-image transformed. So many adults walking around in deep dolor and agony. That's why some people don't fulfill their destiny. Excruciation, never addressed. Now it affects how they function in relationships. Abusing others is their form of entertainment. They think it's funny until they wind up under the pavement. Not condoning violence, but how much can a person tolerate? Especially when it's someone who you lay with on a daily basis. The topic of abuse is intricate with so many swerves. I've seen with my own eyes the long-lasting effects it has caused. It hurts me when I see her in the streets and she makes excuses to remain in the situation. Body language of defeat, devastation. Can abuse be abolished in this evil world? I propose this question to meditate on. I'm going to do this myself. I will seek the face of the Lord on my conquest, because on my own, it may be too much to digest. Abusers must be held accountable for their actions. Karma knocking at the door, no, you cannot escape that. You're being watched no matter what you think. Mr. Untouchable, now you lost everything. And not making fun of anyone, because this subject is truly a travesty in the world. Humans, the embodiment of so many scars. Their strength astounds me, because outside I see courage, but inside it's repression on the verge of explosion. Abuse, a 5-letter word with so much havoc behind it. Dysfunctional generations no longer can we hide it.
Ladies and gentlemen, I know you're just as thrilled as I am by what you just heard. And I'd like to immediately ask the poetess Chanelle, what inspired this beautiful work?
What inspired this beautiful work is a situation that I'm familiar with that happened to someone that I really care about. Like 2 situations of that I'm familiar with that affected my heart, because just because it's not you, that doesn't mean that your feelings are not gonna be hurt, especially if it happens to someone that you care about. Sometimes we think of abuse as, oh, it only happens to certain people. No, nobody's exempt from being abused. It can happen to anybody, no matter what race, no matter what class, no matter what color. So, I'm gonna talk about abuse from a caretaker standpoint. I knew of someone who was taking care of an elderly person, and the elderly person felt like it was okay to abuse the caretaker. And it really hurt me, because usually it's the other way around. It's usually the elderly person getting abused by the caregiver.
Great point.
But in this situation, it was the other way around, and I saw it with my own eyes. It wasn't, this is not hearsay. This is something that I saw, and it just bothered me, because we know that the elderly, sometimes they have issues like dementia, things like that. But in this situation, the person was of sound mind. Of sound mind. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Of sound mind. She can carry on a conversation. She can talk eloquently. Had sense, would tell you to your face you were wrong about something. So this person knew what they were doing.
Right.
And too many times we excuse certain things, like if the person is 80 years old or 70 years old, forget them. Don't worry about them. Don't pay them any mind. No, they have to be accountable to some extent also, especially if they are of sound mind.
Great point.
You can't go around abusing people just because you feel like you're a certain age and you feel like you can do whatever you want. No. Respect is respect. It goes both ways.
Right. I would agree with you. And it's too bad that a lot of times on social media, when elderly people curse people out and abuse them, everybody laughs and makes it into, fun. But like
yes.
you said, that's not proper behavior to support. So I appreciate you bringing that to the light.
Yes. I think it needs to be brought to the light, because the caregiver is trying to extend their services to help you, and you want to be psychologically abusing somebody, mentally abusing somebody, verbally abusing somebody. I just don't think that's right. I just don't think it's right. And that needs to be talked about more. All forms of abuse needs to be talked about. But there are certain types of abuse that don't, it, in my opinion, it doesn't get, the light is not shed on it enough. And
Right.
this is one particular topic.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. You know, there was a time in my life where I even looked up something like that for a paper, and it was so easy to find information to report people who were hurting older people. But in the healthcare, caretaking, nursing systems, as you mentioned, but there were no buttons for the opposite to report an elderly person abusing a caretaker. So that's a great
Right.
point that you make. Ladies and
Yeah.
gentlemen, I know you're paying attention. Discuss that amongst yourselves. Do you even know how to report an elderly person if you were being abused by him or her? Think about it.
That is a great question.
And we'll be
That is,
right back, ladies and gentlemen, with the poetess Chanelle and Cass Allen. We're going to shake you out for a minute, and then we're going to bring you some special guests.
Use your mind, you better think. You better think. Think it through.
so I was thinking about this earlier, like abuse, how many swerves it has, how many things, how many issues that abuse has. It's like so many, it's like so many things you can discuss. And the topic of abuse is sensitive.
It is.
It's a very sensitive topic. And sometimes, in my opinion, only certain types of abuse are highlighted the most, you know.
Right.
But
Make a great point.
yeah, like the topic of abuse in men is something that is very serious, but it's not taken, in my opinion, the way I see it, the way I see people view it, is not taken as serious as like if a woman was being abused, or if a child was being abused. And there are men out here that are being abused.
That is an
And if
excellent point.
yeah, and if they go to friends or family and tell them, they're like, ha ha, yeah, right, yo, you a punk, you letting a girl abuse you. Like, these are the things that I have heard. And it's, to me, it's very sad, you know. And I know of a story that a woman was abusing this guy, and she would put her hands on him, hit him in the face with an iron, okay, and other things, other atrocities. And she called the cops, and they arrested him.
That's so
They arrested
typical.
him.
That is so typical. And on that note, I'd like the audience to be aware that we've not only having being graced by the poetess Chanelle, but Minister Reilly just joined the line as well. Hello, Minister Reilly.
Hello. Hello. Good afternoon to everyone.
Good afternoon. Good evening.
Oh, yes, evening.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure you've been listening to what poetess Chanelle has been saying just now.
Yes, I have. It's true. It's a sad state that we have found ourselves in. And and we women, unfortunately, have come to know that they're going to address the men first in those types of situations. And so some of us have taken advantage of that knowledge and do more than we should be doing in a space to make it look bad for them, for the men or other women.
I agree with that. I agree with that.
When we're speaking to abuse, as the poetess Chanelle just mentioned, there's so many types of abuse that go unnoticed. And as we just mentioned, you know, the men's case, unfortunately, they get slighted because we put so much attention on masculinity and oh, a woman's touch is just a feather. Basically, a man can just lick that off. Let's take a quick spin down to the instance I've seen women who have hit their men, hit their husbands. I had a friend once who took a hard hat and popped her husband across the head. She would just hit him all the time, but she was very, very tiny. So she didn't feel like she was abusing her husband. Which brings me to people who actually are committing this act and don't even know it. Both of you feel free to just give your immediate thoughts on people who are unaware of what they're doing.
Okay,
Right.
so what I'm gonna say is that I'm gonna use myself as an example because I can't really speak for others because I don't know if I don't know if they would be willing to even admit that they are abusers. Okay, but as for me, I have abused. Okay, I have been an abuser. I have been, even if it was just with my verbal words, calling people stupid, ugly. That's hurtful. That's abuse. That could leave a scar on somebody for the rest of their lives. Words hurt. Words hurt. And, Cash, you brought it up. You like, listen, you are an abuser. You could be an abuser too, and you don't even realize it. And an epiphany hit me the other day when we was talking. I said I was an abuser too. I wasn't just a victim.
Right.
Calling names, popping people upside the head. Like,
Right. And we don't realize it. We think it's self-defense, but we are also sometimes abusing the abuser.
Yeah. Yes.
Yes. I think that when we spend so much time, when we're growing up, when those of us who are moms and who have sons, right? And we spend so much time telling them, you don't hit women, you don't hit women, you don't hit women. And if a woman hits you, you do your best to just walk away, do what you have to get away, but do your best not to put your hands on her, and so we grow up thinking, and then if we have daughters, not me per se, but if we have daughters also, and then they hit their brother or they hit and they're never addressed
right.
About doing that. And so then they grow up thinking it's okay to hit one because, like you said, they're men. This is not going to hurt them. This is not that bad, and that kind of thing. And so some of us as women, we get into that habit because we were raised thinking that it's not a big deal hitting a guy because I know that he's not going to hit me, right? And so we get appalled when we as women hit a man and a man would come back and retaliate, and then we're ready to like you said, call the cops, and we're ready to call out our brothers or whoever, come get him because he hit me. And without thinking that it was provoked, and that's a man that you're hitting, right? It's not, so I think that if we need to pay close attention to how our society has groomed some abusers, right? How we've made it okay. And that's why they don't think that it's that bad, right? We don't think that as mothers who lived in an abusive relationship and allowed our children to see it happen, we don't see how we're telling our sons that it's okay to be hit.
Right.
And how we're not telling our daughters that it's okay to be hit, right? And so then all they're doing is perpetuating what they've seen. And I don't see, why is that wrong? My mom, who in other areas is the strongest woman I know, and my dad or whomever it was hitting on her and she was fine with it. How come you're not fine with it? Right. And
Right.
so I don't think we pay attention to the kinds of messages and the lessons that we're teaching while our children are impressionable.
And I'm sure you hear that, ladies and gentlemen, as with many topics, it all goes back to the beginning. How you begin to groom the child into the adult, the impressionable acts and words that we lay upon them. We'll be right back.
You better think. Use your mind. You better think. You better think. Think it through. You better think. You better think. You better think.
Yes, this topic is a very, like I keep saying, it's a very sensitive topic. And it's I wanted to ask you a question. Do you have siblings?
I was raised with a brother.
Okay. Did you fight with him?
Absolutely.
Because let me tell you why I brought that up. Because I just remembered how, I have a brother and we used to fight a lot. And I'm just thinking about the time that I hit him upside the head with the block because I didn't want to let him play with it. Now that was abuse. Wasn't that abuse? No, let's talk about it. Was that not abuse? And we always used to fight.
Yes, I don't know why why when I'm thinking about this, because some of the things I think it's abuse when either sibling is allowed to exert more power over the other, and it's not addressed. Right. I think that becomes abuse. The combativeness of siblings that can go on, if it's like a give and take and we both just trying to see what we can do, and no one is allowed to be the aggressor alone. I think that can lead to abuse. So if you're saying, like when you're saying that you beat your brother over the top of the head, if your brother tried if he tried to retaliate and your parents then said to him, leave her alone, or if they said to you or didn't say anything to you, then that was allowing you to abuse him. Does that make sense? That's
Yes,
how I feel.
Yeah, that came to my mind because I don't know why it did. It just came to my head. Like, I used to really be putting my hands on my brother. That was abuse.
That's a great point. We always talk about lovers, being abused by people that we're sexually intimate with, if you will. Or even a parent abusing a child, is one that we see in the news all the time. Or a child abusing a parent, but siblings is definitely a hot topic.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I had a daughter who was like that, and the youngest one, and she was so aggressive with them, and they would run from her, and they would, and she would just be coming after him, and they would go, oh no, the bombing old baby, because she was so treacherous. And I would always have to come back. So I would consider that her abusing them, because every time I left or turned my head, she was doing something like what you were saying, like throwing blocks at their heads or biting them or punching them or doing something like that. That would be that she was abusing them, and I would go in there like, oh, I'm just gonna take her out so y'all can go in here and play. But every time she was around them, she was just terrorizing. She was terrorizing them. And so
interesting. Listen to you smiling. We look back and we giggle.
Yeah.
Yes, that's sad. It's sad. Just like you said, we're smiling at it, but she was so little, and I think that's what we look at, and we sit there and say, "Man, look at she's so tiny. she's so much younger than y'all. She's so much smaller than y'all, right? And so we leave it that way and say it's not that bad. She's so small, but it was bad. Like she was not just hitting it with her little hand. She was, going at it with bigger things. And
Wow.
then but thank God I addressed it. I did address it. I didn't let her just get to, it's like, I didn't say, y'all leave her alone. She's just a baby. I never said that to them to
Right.
let them think that it was okay for her to do what she was doing. But she was abusing them.
And again, you heard it here, ladies and gentlemen. The key is remedial action as soon as these things begin. Thank you both for this session right here, and we're
You
going to take a
better
break.
think. Use your
Thank you,
mind. You better think. You better think. Think it through. You better think. You better think. You better think.
Before we get started, Brett, I just, as we spoke on the phone, I want to thank you for being here today to help shed some light on male abuse. As you and I know from working together in the previous past, there's always a lot of work to do. And Bullhorn Gypsy is back. I don't need to explain any of that to you. I've come back with a vengeance and with a different plan, and I have a wonderful business partner who I just introduced you to. She and I run a radio show together called You Betta THiNK, which is basically getting people to stop being zombies without going into details with you, And once a month, we pick a topic that's important that we need to get people to think about more. And this month is abuse. And we thought about how we're always talking about women and children being abused, and we really don't shed enough light on the male perspective. And as you and I know from your personal past and some of your endeavors, I figured you're the ideal guest to discuss it on a personal and a business level. And Poetess Chanelle has a lot of investment in social services. So I think she is ideal person to take the floor. I already did a personal intro of you while you were both preparing to come on. So I'm basically going to pass the buck to her and let you two talk some and get to know each other a little bit through an interview, okay?
All right, sounds good. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Poetess Chanelle, as always, for being here for this. So I'm going to sip my tea and let you two do your thing.
Good evening. Good evening, Mr. Scudder.
Yes, my sister. Yes, we here, brother and sister. We here.
Right. And how are you feeling tonight?
It's a rough time, challenging time, a time of, restructuring or rethinking,
Okay.
about me and what I'm doing and just this path moving forward. It's been 15, 20 years doing this work, and now I think I can sit back and watch this whole mental health crisis fall into place.
Okay. Sounds wonderful. So I want to get into Scudder Intervention Services Foundation Incorporated. I went on your website and I was very, very impressed with the things that I saw. But I would like to ask you, what made you start the organization? And tell us what you do as it relates to the subject of abuse.
Well, first, thank you for that. Yes, our website, we try to put information out there for people to know that it's okay to not be okay, to talk about mental health, to talk about emotional wellness, and the elephant in the room of suicide. Started this work over 20 some years ago, going through my own personal experiences and seeing how the health and mental health system is set up for people, especially people of color, especially males, who there aren't many services or programs that are out here for males. And so when we go through life and there's challenges and struggles of life, where do we go? Who do we turn to? And how can we get the support that we need for us to be healthy, for us to be okay, while we're still trying to play the roles and responsibilities of who we are? And so for me, I've been through a lot in my life, physical and psychological, have experienced abuse in a number of different settings, and just really seeing how for us as men, we really are struggling. And unfortunately, society still looks down as emotional male as a weak male. to be vulnerable. We still talk about vulnerability from perspective of weakness, but not understanding how it takes great strength to really talk about how you're feeling, what you're feeling, and not act out in anger, not act out violently. Even when you're abused, sometimes some of us choose not to raise our hand because we don't want to be the abuser, but society doesn't look at the fact that we're victims. They only see us as abuser and
Yes, I totally agree with you, Mr. Scudder. I agree with everything you just said, because my business partner and I, we talk about this. We have been talking about this subject for the past few weeks, and how it's hard for men to express themselves because they are viewed as, oh, I have to be strong. I cannot show my emotions. I don't have anywhere to release my emotions. And you know, it is unfair that men have this stereotype on them that they have to be strong and they're not allowed to cry and they're not allowed to have emotions. You know, so you did bring up a valid point that we need to have a place where men can vent and you know, express themselves and feel free. You also said you have been through some abuse in your past. Would you like to give us a little snippet of what happened to you?
So, I mean, when we talk about abuse, I want to be clear as we get into the conversation. When we talk about abuse, there are different forms of abuse, different types and levels of abuse. And so a lot of times when we think about abuse, you know, a lot of times we focus it from a physical perspective. But in my life, I've experienced abuse on a number of levels where I've personally found that the psychological abuse was 10 times greater, more painful, harder to deal with than physical abuse and different types of abuse that's out there. And so when we're talking about abuse, I want us to open our minds to understand that there are a number of different things that can happen in your life. And there are a number of ways in which you can be a victim of abuse. But when we look at how people deal with the impacts of that, that's the conversation that is missing a lot. And how PTSD and trauma comes out of those types of abuse that can sometimes stay with us for the rest of our lives if we don't get the proper help and treatment. And so for me, I've experienced that in a number of settings, in the professional and personal settings, intimate and non-intimate settings, and it always felt the same way. You know, when you look at us as males and people look at it from an external factor, and you know, we say, oh, you know, a good-looking man, you're very educated by the way you talk, eloquent in the way you talk, and just really looking at all the outward and external features and all of that stuff. But the abuse does take root inside and can be fester inside, that it really starts making you look at yourself different, feel different about yourself, doubt yourself, self-esteem issues, a lot of things in which can sometimes negatively affect, you know, just who you are. And I went through that a number of times in my life before I realized, you know what, the problem wasn't me. I wasn't. The problem was other people who, through their own experiences and what they were going through, are now perpetuating a cycle of abuse that they don't even know how to break. But unfortunately, it did have very serious impacts on me. And at one point, I ended up thinking about suicide, really contemplating it seriously, because I just felt like I couldn't take this anymore. It was just too much. It was too traumatizing. It was just too much to handle. And so out of that whole experience, learning about what healthcare really means, and is healthcare really here to help us as we are going through the challenges of life. And that's where I started the Scudder Intervention Services Foundation, because when I was seeking help for the trauma and the victimization that I went through as a result of that abuse, I just didn't feel like there were psychological services that understood those pieces that were able to help. And I just spiraled into this rabbit hole of a lot of depression, anxiety, and self-harm, because I couldn't get the help that I needed.
Okay, I understand. And you know, it's like it is a very sensitive topic. And like you said, there are different forms of abuse. But I would like to explore and ask you, In regards to your self-esteem, could you expand a little bit on how it affected your self-esteem?
I never thought that I would ever have been a victim of abuse at the hands of an intimate partner. And when it happened, I remember one incident, I stood there and I cried like a baby as I was bleeding from what she did to me. And as I cried, I was really starting to question myself. Had this not been an intimate partner that I shared that intimacy with, that person would have been dead. I mean, seriously, it would have turned out into a very tragic situation. But the reality is, it affected me. I started looking at myself differently, feeling different about myself, questioning myself, doubting myself, looking at myself from a physical perspective as how people would
Right.
see me, but then starting to lose that real person that was inside and the beautiful person that was inside, and the energy that I had inside of just being that person started to diminish as a result of a lot of the doubts and fears that I was feeling from that. And so when you look at that and you look at society today, you look at how many of us are struggling and we're suffering in silence with loneliness and despair in the midst of a relationship with someone that we hold so dear that we will defend down to the point of death. But are we being reciprocated in the quality and the levels of that love and affection and care that we're giving? So that self-esteem and looking at myself and doubting myself and feeling less than of myself, came from the whole fact that this was someone who was an intimate partner, someone that
Right.
would have been the last person that I would ever think to really do something like that or put me in such a position. And it's really hard when you are faced with that type of reality and understanding how to move through that.
Right. And I could imagine that you felt unattractive. You said, "What's wrong with me? Am I unattractive? Am I ugly?" You were beating up on yourself. Am I correct in saying that you were beating up on yourself?
So you're right, but I don't think it's from a physical perspective that we look at that, um the self-worth, the self-esteem. I think what starts to happen is you look in the mirror and you don't see the person that you used to see. You don't feel like the person that you used to feel. Not that the outside has changed, but the emotions on the inside that have changed. And those emotions have now made you start feeling anger and resentment and regrets and guilt and all these different things. And it bears very heavily on your soul and from the inside. And so that can turn to darkness for someone who is feeling this way and not having an outlet or not having a safe outlet. And so when you look at a lot of times where the abuser becomes the abused becomes the abuser, hurt people. These are the hard realities, that there are so many of us as males who are struggling with abuse. We're still labeled as abusers, even though we're the victim. And a society of just brokenness continues to perpetuate itself.
Okay. I understand what you're saying now. I also I want to expand on when you said that you thought of you were contemplating suicide. What made you decide that no, I'm not going to do this? What made you change your mind?
I don't think it was a matter of changing of the mind. I think we have to look at it from the perspective of the pain that we are going through and how we're hurting. A lot of times, even right before this, I was reading an article of how, a person who took the life of someone and then turned and took their own life. A lot of times when we look at that and we say, how can people be so evil? How can someone be so wicked? And usually it's males who completes, these heinous acts of murder, suicide, right? But when we look at it and we ask ourselves, you know, how do you look at the male who does not raise their hand, does not become aggressive or be belligerent or abusive to others or their partners, even when they're being abused? And so you turn the violence on yourself instead of hurting other people, you start hurting yourself. And
Wow.
that's violence against self can sometimes lead to drinking, addiction, overdose deaths, because again, you're trying to to process what you're going through and to kind of, you know, deal with the pain of what you're going through. And then violence against self becomes so real. For me, it wasn't a matter of turning away or changing my mind. For me, it was a failed attempt. It was a failed attempt. Don't ask me why. Don't ask me how it failed. It was just God's time. God was not ready for me yet. And so when you look at that and you ask yourself, how many times do we have our brothers out here who are going through so much abuse that they would rather kill themselves or end up killing themselves as a result of what they're going through? And no one knew. They had no outlet. They didn't talk about it, or they weren't in a safe space that they felt like they could disclose that.
Yes, they felt like they had to be tough. They can't show their emotions. They have to be a man like society, you know, promotes and perpetuates. You have to be a man. No crying. Don't cry. What are you crying for? You're a man. You a big boy. Big boys don't cry. Men don't cry. I've been in I come from a Caribbean background, and they promote that. What you crying for? You know, you a man, don't cry, you know. So it's not to say that it's just you know, Caribbean people. No, I would never say that. I would never stereotype, but I'm talking about my experience and what I've seen. And it's very unfortunate that we live in a society where men cannot express themselves without being viewed as weak and emotionally weak. So I want to ask you, do you think that the subject of men being abused, this subject that is so delicate and is so important, the subject of being men being abused, do you think that is highlighted enough?
It's not talked about enough, much as to be highlighted. How do we even begin that conversation? Where do we begin that conversation? And how can that conversation begin without men being comfortable within their own vulnerability to come out and talk about it? Let me tell you the reality of what's going on as you're talking about that.
Okay.
Society does not embrace this whole idea of emotional meals because we see that as a sign of weakness, right? Don't be a punk, don't be a wuss, don't be the P word, all those different things, right?
Yes.
And so our own partners, right? Our own partners are perpetuating the same cycle, the societal abuse that we're going through in society, because we can't even get that within the relationships that we're in, right? We don't get that understanding of how much weight it is, especially for men of color, how much weight it is to wake up in the morning and just play the role of who you are throughout the day. And with no regrets, no second guessing, or no even question of, hey, how are you? How are you feeling? Right? And so we go through the day so much with so many burdens, that we carry so many burdens and roles and responsibilities, being disrespected, being disregarded, being ostracized, being labeled, being re-traumatized and re-victimized. And there's a toll on that. And as soon as you start speaking out and as soon as you start reacting in some kind of way, you start getting again that same cycle again by somebody else, by other people, by other groups, even within the male, gender itself, being re-traumatized by our own brothers of what we're going through. So it's not even about being highlighted. It's not even being recognized as an issue to be addressed. It's not even given the credence of time and space and the respect of time and space for that to happen. And so the cycle continues every single day. So now where you see these babies, you see, a boy baby being treated different from a girl baby. You see our young, at the young age of our boys, they're already starting this cycle of brokenness through a generational curse that's just really been out here. And so you have a lot of our males today, very emotional, very fragile, very egotistical, very broken. And what can they do? Where do they go? So again, the cycle just continues and it keeps going and going and going.
Thank you for enlightening us on that, because you know I had it wrong. I thank you for clearing that up. Um I would like to just, you know, ask, tell the audience what they can do to get help when the men. Tell them what they can do or where they can go to get help if they are feeling abused, if they need someone to talk to and they feel like they have nowhere to turn to. Tell the audience what they can do and where they can go or who they can call.
Well, let me just say this. I think the first thing that we need to do to really address this problem in a meaningful and effective way is to start fostering healthy relationships where males are given the opportunity to talk about their emotions and how they're feeling and listen to as they talk about their emotions and how they're feeling. It is known that in most cases, 95% of the cases or more, that males will turn to an intimate partner or to some, male brother or somebody that they can relate to a similar experience before they turn to health or mental health, or before they turn to some form of violence that ends up in the justice system, the prison system. So the first thing we need to do is talk about how can we foster more enlightening, comfortable, and open relationships so that the help and support you can first have that with a partner. Nothing speaks more important to a male than having the support of a partner that says, I'm glad that you shared this with me. I'm sorry that you're feeling this way and you're going through all this, but we're going to go through this together. This is not something you have to take on your own. This is not something you have to fight or struggle with on your own. We're going to do this work together so you can be whole. It's a whole different mindset than when a male talks about how they're feeling and what they're feeling, everybody runs every direction away from him and he's left there standing alone with the issues and challenges that he's feeling. That does not help the mental or emotional wellness of that person, that male, in what he's going through. And so if a victim of abuse and continues to be abused, not only by whoever the abuser is, but also the society and how society plays into that, that continues a cycle of brokenness. So we start with the intimate relationships. The next thing is within the family. So when the families get together, we are so good at embracing our females and our daughters about how they're feeling when they talk about how they're feeling. And as soon as the males open their mouth, there's this whole judgmental retribution, condemnation that comes with that. We have to change that within the family structure. The family now needs to even more than ever ask the males how you're doing. Are you okay? How is life? How are you feeling? Just checking in with them. And if and when they choose to open up about what they're going through, be very patient and supportive with that. That's a struggle. So that's the second part of it. The third part of that is how in our communities do we create safe spaces for males to come together to talk about what we're feeling, how we're feeling it, the experiences that we're going through, have gone through, the impacts of those experiences, the trauma that's left behind from those experiences, and how it may be affecting the behaviors and modes of who we are. So that's 3 stages right there that can really start a very critical look at and solving a lot of the problems out here. And here's one of the biggest issues that will solve. A lot of times male act out violently and aggressively because of emotions that they're feeling. Pent up emotions, bottled up emotions, pain that they're feeling that's turning them into darkness and despair and changing them from being good men to demons. So now when they have the outlet and they are getting the support from an intimate partner, the family members in the community, what happens is that pent up anger is no longer being pent up. And so they're able to release that and being able to address conflicts and things in positive and effective ways. Not hostile, not aggressive, not violent, but really being able to hold a conversation about how we're feeling, what we're feeling, how these things are making us feel worse, and what we need to be able to help us to get on the path of recovery. So there are a lot of ways that helping males to deal with their emotions, talk about their victimology in terms of how they were victimized, how they feel victimized, and never invalidating the fact that this is what we feel. the worst thing that you could ever do to a male who is talking about how he's feeling is say, well, that's not valid. That's not valid for you to think or feel like that.
Okay. But I want to ask a serious question. What if there's a male being abused and he just doesn't want anybody to know where where can he go to get help? What are the resources that are available to him that he can call someone, go somewhere, seek a shelter, seek a domestic violence shelter? what what is available to this type of person? That's what I'm asking. What are the resources that are available from this, especially this kind of example? You have some men who are being abused that don't want anyone to know. Where can they go to get help? That's what I would like to know.
So there's two parts to what you're asking. One is the male who does not want to get help because he's afraid of the disclosure of him being a victim of abuse and other people finding out that he's a victim of abuse. And then there's the other of the male who doesn't want anyone to know, not because he doesn't want anyone to know, but because he doesn't feel that there is a safe space or a safe place to go. So there are men's shelters, right? They are men's shelters that provide housing and support for males who are going through um, different things. And so they are also, one of the things that I talk about is community. In the community, safe places where men can gather would be another outlet for that. But the reality is, if for me as a male, I'm going through what I'm going through and I don't want to talk about it, you can't force me to talk about it. The services or resources may be there and available, but I may not be ready to talk about it. So there is a part about readiness where we need to come out about what we're feeling and being prepared on how that is being received. So whether you're going for counseling or therapy or going to support groups or whatever it is, you have to be ready within yourself to be vulnerable about what you're going through and then be connected to the help and support that you're needing. So as you're needing these help and supports, you have to, again, find one that's comfortable for you. Because not because we're males don't mean that every service that's open or out there that's available is something that we're going to be comfortable with. A lot of times we are not part of the decision-making process of how these services or resources are made available. And so sometimes we don't even feel like we want to go out in the first place to talk about what we're feeling because of what the responses we're going to get or the fact that it's not going to make a difference.
Okay, I understand what you're saying. I understand what you're saying, that it's not just one answer. It's layered. It's a lot. It's not a simple answer to
Yes.
this question. And I understand that. So I would like to ask you, what advice right now can you give to the audience members, someone out there who is facing a male who is facing abuse? What advice can you give to the audience?
So my speaking directly to my brothers who are, going through what you're going through, one of the hardest lessons that I learned when I came out about my abuse is how quickly and easily people are ready to run away from you just because you're speaking your truth or coming out in your truth. And so one of the lessons that I learned from all of this is I'd rather be by myself than be with and around people who are either using or abusing me or making me feel like I have to hide who I am, how I am, and what I'm going through. One of the things I thank God for every day is as much as 95 to 98% of the people in my personal and professional life ran away from me or turned against me when I was going through it, all the people that God has put in my life since then were people who are much better at who they are, made me feel much better of who I am, and just really were genuine people in just being supportive of that. That took a very hard lesson. So speaking to you, my brothers, listen, the pain that you're going through and what you're feeling is real. Don't ever let anyone tell you it's not. Don't ever let anyone minimize how you feel in what you're going through. If you don't have an intimate partner that you can confide in, that you are able to freely talk about how you're feeling, getting the help and support in what you're feeling, then that's not a healthy environment. That's not a healthy relationship for you to be in, because it's not allowing you to have the outlet to release and relieve what you're going through. And that's your first thing, is to make sure that you're in a healthy relationship that's helping you to build on and be the greatness that you need to be, not just as a male, but as a king, right? And not be diminished by the partner and family members that we have. Some of your family members, you have to love them from a distance. You got to stay away from them, because they are also the reason why you may be feeling the way that you're feeling. They may also have been the cause of the trauma that you're going through. So you have to learn to distance yourself away from people who are not helping you to grow or helping your mental and emotional state to be well. And as you're moving through life and as you're meeting people, never be ashamed of who you are. Never be ashamed of who you are, what you've gone through, the experiences that you've gone through, and don't have guilt and regret walk with you for the rest of your life. You need to start owning what you've gone through, whether you caused it deliberately or not, whether you're a victim or, whatever trauma that you've experienced as a result. Don't let that be something that keeps you as a hostage, and you're just not able to live the life that you need to live, the quality of the life that you need to live. There are places that are now starting to open up for males to find safety and comfort, because there are people like me who are not afraid to tell my story. I don't care what you think about me or what you say about me telling my story. I know the pain that I've been through. I know the anguish that I've experienced, and coming out of all of that in a victorious way, I am standing tall in who I am. And my brothers, you need to free yourself and relieve yourself of a lot of the baggage and negativity, the toxic energy that you keep walking around with, just because you want to seem like you're a man and be a big man and not be thought of as weak.
Brett and Poetess Chanelle, we are out of time, so I need you two to wrap it up in about a minute.
Yes,
All
ma'am.
right. We are going to wrap it up. I would like to thank you, Mr. Scudder, for joining us on You Betta THiNK and giving us this wonderful information show hosted by Cass Allen and Poetess Chanelle. You Betta THiNK. Good night.
Good night. Thank you.
Thank you, Brett. This is wonderful. I will text you tomorrow about the
Okay.
other stuff we discussed.
Yes, ma'am.
And good night to you both.